Hey, Suzanne.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
Oh, I'm too busy. Primary on-call last week was a nightmare. Absolutely miserable. We had like 5 high priority things that all came in 1 week. It's very miserable.
How often? I feel like you're on call quite a bit. How often is
Yeah.
the rotation?
So our rotation is 3 people, kinda. Yeah. So our rotation is 3, although our rotation is shared. So we have like 2 distinct sides of the house in AKS, and my side of the house only has 2 people. So I'm on call technically every other week.
And how does
So
backup
it's a lot.
work?
How does what?
Backup on call.
Essentially, I still help most of the time. So you're never really off call, more or less. Like the primary just means you don't have to drive in if you're not the primary, but you're pretty much always helping if there's an issue. So yeah, it's pretty rough.
Well, the sun is out. I hope you have a good week this week.
Yeah, the weather's been great so far. So I'm hoping to be the backup so that I can at least help from a room that can see the sun. So
Yeah, there's some like nice / hot for Seattle weather coming up.
yeah. It'll be good.
And I also heard the strawberries are finally ready for you pick.
Oh, really? It's funny. When we lived in Southern California, like they have a field like that, like a strawberry place where you can go pick them, but it was open year round. So it never occurred to me. They're like, oh yeah,
Strawberries are seasonal.
Yeah. They just grow them all the time because it's sunny like 300 something days a year.
Yeah, that's nice. Lee is here today. Oh, I see everyone is here. Hello, everyone. Hi, Jimmy. Hi, Nathan. Hi, Kash. Hi, Lee.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. Hello.
Yeah, good to see everyone. I think we can get started. So the first item, and Teja is here. Let me admit her as well. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, here, I'm a mess, but I'll turn on my camera.
You look great, Eric. Okay, so your PR is first. I left some comments in the pass-through mode execution, like mostly like maybe add more logging and add more details to the documentation. And I thought the code change were pretty straightforward, where like we do a shortcut, like if we want to continue and we're not in the pass-through mode, or like not pass-through mode, then we continue the verification.
Right. So, yeah.
Akash, did you have a chance to review the path there?
Yeah, I took a look at it. I think it makes sense to me. I'll give it another look through. If not, I'll just approve it. I think it's ready to go, essentially.
Cool. Yeah, Lee, I think you weren't here, so you missed this one last week, but I think you might appreciate some of the changes from here, because I think some of the policy authoring stuff, I put a policy authoring document as part of this PR. So
I'll have to take a look at that. That'd be really good to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be this file. Okay.
Yeah.
we'll take another look at this. And Eric, you also had some comments on like doing some additional null checks and stuff like that. So
yeah, I still need to make some changes there, since technically, since that's a pointer, like we should be doing null checks. Because I did run into, there are some code paths. I updated all the code paths that use the executor to populate that with like the default empty struct, but since it technically can be null, we need to make sure that I check for that.
cool. Just to refresh memory a little bit, Lee, is this a mode that's useful to your scenarios, the pass-through mode where Ratify would return the entire verifier report instead of just the is success?
Yeah, it's definitely more in line with how we see Ratify as best making sense, especially just because like the non-pass-through mode to some degree requires that Ratify build in some amount of policy. And at least in our thinking, that seems like not the best path to go down, because you'll end up redoing a bunch of the same sort of work that OPA and Gatekeeper have done. But so, yeah, our primary scenario when we're thinking about things is in the context of a Kubernetes cluster. So yeah, but this fits that.
Yeah, I remember, Lee, you mentioned that, like, I remember we have a conversation about the is success result. So in the pass-through mode, the is success flag, not the flag, the result is irrelevant because we're in the pass-through mode. And the current default, I believe, Eric, is in the pass-through mode is success is true. Like, should we default that to false? Is that safe, or
we can? I mean,
is that just ignored?
Yeah, we have to, since it's part of our interface, we have to include it. So it would just be, I mean, we could set it to false to indicate that Ratify hasn't verified any, like Ratify hasn't made a decision. Maybe that's safer. Yeah, I mean, essentially that in pass-through mode, that value should be ignored. So, but we have to give something. So if we wanted to lean towards safety, then yeah, we could default that to false, so that unless you explicitly write a policy that checks individual verifiers, like if you just check that top level thing when you're in pass-through mode, it will fail. Just so that we're not admitting, because if you take like our default policy, for example, that checks to success, and you deploy pass-through mode and you deploy the default, you will never block anything. So we could default the top level is success to false, so that if you are running in pass-through mode, but you deploy the default policy, you'll block everything just to be safe. So I can change that. I think that can make sense.
This is largely a question because I'm not super familiar with the contents of your PR. But what does and doesn't get skipped about the verification process based on pass-through mode? Because like I assume that the function of the verifiers is still going to be at least somewhat the same. So what's the distinction logic-wise?
Right. So in pass-through, so in like the default like the current default mode, whatever policy you've defined as part of Ratify can dictate whether or not you continue with validation or you short circuit. Like, so if you hit a scenario where you need all of a certain artifact type to be valid and one of them isn't, you will stop validating everything and just return a failure. So pass-through mode ignores that and just says, we're going to validate every artifact that we have with every verifier that's relevant to it. And we're going to bundle up all of those results and return them. So like Susan, if you go to that markdown, there's an example in there of what the, and you scroll, I think, down to the JSON bit. Keep going. Yeah, so this JSON, for example. So here you can see the response. So there's a payload, for example, per subject. So in this example, there's only one subject, net monitor v1, and there you can see there's a top level is success. And then there's nested, there's verifier reports. So every single artifact will produce a verifier report for every verifier that can check that artifact. So here you can see there's a return for an SBOM, for a notary signature validation, for a cosign signature. So that's what you would get in pass-through mode. You'll technically get this now in default mode as well. But is success at the top there in default execution mode will be based on the policy that's dictated in the Ratify config. And in pass-through mode, that value is arbitrarily set to true. We could arbitrarily set it to false, but essentially it's expected that you'll ignore that in favor of doing your own policy decision based on the verifier reports in Rego. So that's the I guess the meat of the change is that you get back this giant thing from Ratify instead of just that like one-liner that we had prior. And then in the library folder, if you check that out, I put 3 samples in there. So there's a issuer validation that checks some of the data from the notary. Like here you can see there's also extensions now that I've added. So the verifiers can add arbitrary data when they return the report. So the notary verifier now adds issuer information and subject name. So there's a sample policy that checks that. And then the default policy just checks is success, and then also checks that there's no system errors or subject level errors. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, that's the change. And then that's the delta between pass-through and default.
I can see Lee is going through.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still just trying to think through. But yeah, I know that the way we've been thinking about Ratify is very much in the framework of offload all the decision making onto Gatekeeper or OPA or some other policy engine. So this lines up pretty well with that. I think the other conversation we've had in the past around the is success value was talking about changing it from a marker of success failure and rather reframing it in terms of does it match or not match the config, which I want to try to have a better example for that. But like the example my coworker Kara came up with, for example, is if you're doing a check of someone's ID for a license, there's a difference between saying, are they older or younger than 18? And then saying, based on that information, can I sell this? Well, I guess alcohol wouldn't be 18. It's a bad example. But I think part of our framing for it has been, rather than trying to pin it down to a success or no, you put in some amount of configuration that's like, okay, check that these, report if these keys exist. And there's nothing about that that necessarily has to come back to an is success so much that it just reports, yeah, we found this key. But I do think that that's pretty heavily colored by the fact that we are very much framing this in the thought of the decision point lands back in Gatekeeper or OPA or some policy engine that can do more complex decision making. Especially because once you get into, like, the easy example in my head is, well, I want to know if an image has an SBOM that is signed. That's two different pieces of a decision point. That's both the image has an SBOM that is a valid SBOM, and maybe it like meets some criteria around, like, it doesn't include these packages with known vulnerabilities or something. And it's also a decision point about the SBOM has been signed by one of these specified keys. And if you're dealing with that in your verifier then needs to be able to understand multiple artifact types and be able to do multiple types of verification. But rather what you want to happen is that at some point when you're doing that decision making, you're just checking that, like, okay, the SBOM met these configurations, and we found a signature that's been signed by this issuer, or that has this issuer attached to it. And it's at that point that you can say, all right, this meets my criteria. But until that point, you're not really signaling success. You're just signaling, you know, we've checked it off against this one particular piece of config, and now we have more information to move further down the line for a decision. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, in general, the pass-through mode much better aligns with how we're thinking about it and how we want to work with it.
Yeah, I think this will enable some of the use cases you're talking about. There are still some open-ended ones for your use case where you were like, oh, well, you know, you want the granularity to be able to configure Ratify for different namespaces. So that would still require further changes. But at least in this context, this will give you all of the results back, so you could play with some of the stuff you're talking about at the gatekeeper level. There's still some stuff, like when I was implementing this, I was like, oh yeah, if you look at the results here, there's no way to tell artifacts apart. Like, you just know, like, there's no subject name or subject reference in here. So, like, for example, if I didn't add the extensions here and something was signed with 10 different keys, you would just have 10 different artifact type notary v2 signatures in here, and they would just be true or false, but you wouldn't necessarily know you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. So that's why I was like, oh, well, we should add some stuff so you can tell them apart. So anyways, there's still more stuff that would be probably be useful if you wanted to get fancy with the policy that we should add, either as an extension or you know, as a top level field if it makes sense. But this at least is a step in that direction.
I think on the namespace note, it doesn't necessarily have to be enabled by namespaces specifically, but I do think that concept of how does Ratify deal with multi-tenancy? How does it deal with a situation where you have like two different teams deploying into a shared Kubernetes cluster, for example, and how does it make that work without massively ballooning like the execution time? Because right now the model of run every store and verifier against every request, like that won't bode well for any sort of multi-tenant scenario. So like I definitely think that that's an area worth doing some more thinking or planning or designing, even if it's not an area you tackle right away.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lee. Is that tracked as a issue already on GitHub?
That's a good question. I know I made an issue specific to using namespaces to enable multi-tenancy. I don't know if I made a more generic issue just talking about multi-tenancy, and I probably should have.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely something we can think about in the future. And like if we do support multi-tenancy, so there's some redesigning of the configuration. And do you think that's before we have the verifiers and the store as CRDs, or after? Like, is that something we need to design before we think about CRDs?
I could see that going either way. Like when we were talking through points of what that design could potentially look like, we were sort of working with the assumption that you'd utilize namespaces for those separation in a Kubernetes context. And in that case, you've got that separation basically built into things as long as your CRDs are namespaced. You don't have to be using that information right away to know that it's available and it can be utilized in the future. But there's other ways that the problem could be solved. Like if instead of namespacing CRDs, you set up a general, here's the CRD that tells you how to get to this custom verifier. And then there's a separate thing that, sorry if there's knocking in the background, I can hear. I think there's someone on the roof at the moment.
No problem.
But yeah, if instead of namespacing CRDs, you set up some specific like setting configuration of one filtered set of rules in a CRD, like that could at that point be something that you really had to plan for and design for. I think it depends on further design decisions though. I do think that regardless of how it's handled in the CRD context, handling multi-tenancy in contexts, whether or not you're in Kubernetes, is going to be at least somewhat worth thinking about. Obviously, if in a running this as a local CLI, like that's not going to be a context that introduces the problem. But even just sort of a generic admission control server that takes requests outside of Kubernetes is still probably going to want to tackle that multi-tenant problem.
Yeah. Yeah, feel free to log an item and we can start from there.
Okay. And yeah, I double checked. I made an item for the namespace specific discussion of this, but I don't think I made an item for the generic problem. So I'll add those details.
Just curious, is that something that is blocking you in your scenario, the multi-tenancy at the moment?
No, that's more of a forward-looking thing. At the moment, most of our scenario is try to get any semblance of an end-to-end sample for secure supply chain from a like Microsoft tooling first viewpoint. And so we're much more on a simpler case of there's one unified cluster operator, there's one unified team, and we just want to be able to deploy an image to the cluster and have it verified in a few ways. But in terms of what we have for customer signal and just in terms of what we've seen for customer scenarios, it's an almost unavoidable design question that'll have to be solved in some way.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for the context. Any other comment on this PR before we move to the next PR? Okay, moving to the next one is the, oh, thank you for populating the attendees, someone. I was working on the Firewatcher, but then I needed to address a security vulnerability. So I started this PR to update the cosign package. And I just want to double check that the updates like this update is a little unexpected. I had to, like, when I'm validating that a signature, a cosigned signature was properly signed and it's valid, I had to update the cosigned artifact type. So Eric, I was going through the Ratify on AWS walkthrough, and this is the configuration file I was going through. Like you can see, so I made some updates to the policy and the plugin because with Akasha's latest updates, if we say that if we have configured the notary plugin, it's expecting to do some validation. So like this was throwing an error. So I've removed it from the configuration file for the walkthrough. And trying to see the cosign artifact type is, dev.cosign simple signing v1.json. Should this match the string that's defined in the cosign store right here? So my understanding is like, when we get artifact.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to go. A lot of these I looked at by like querying the registry. Like I have a Postman collection that I go query all the manifest data from. So I haven't looked at this in a while. So I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, no problem. Like when I was doing debugging the cosign verifier, sorry, I wasn't debugging the cosign verifier. I was debugging plugin.go, the can verify method. If this artifact type didn't match what was the artifact type in the plugin, the can verify returned false for me, which is why I changed the artifact type to simple signing v1.json. So that's the background. So feel free to let me know later offline, like if this is expected.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'll have to try with I'll have to see if there's any changes. I'll go update my cosign. Like I signed when I first started with Ratify, I generated some image in a registry with a bunch of artifacts hanging off of it, and I haven't changed them since. So if anything's changed with like cosigner notary, I probably need to go update all of mine to make sure my test cases are still valid for recent versions of stuff.
Yeah, I think there was a cosign breaking change around maybe 1.5.
Okay, I'll go have to see what I've got.
Yeah, and other than this string update, they also updated like some constant, they're moving some constant around from their packages. So I've just statically defined the signature tag suffix here because they removed it from the cosign package. Yeah, so that's basically the change. But Eric, I'll follow up with you offline.
Cool. Yeah, and I just looked, my version of cosign is 1.4. So if they change, so I'll probably have to update and see what happens.
Yep, sounds good. Going back our PR list. Yeah, we have a bunch of dependency update. I believe, Akash, can you confirm these can be validated through Kubernetes secret? Like, are they related to Kubernetes secret path, the auth path?
Yeah, I actually just upgraded these like 2 weeks ago from the previous version. I guess they released a new one. So yeah, just through the Kubernetes secret and just a sanity test. Once that goes through, I think they're good to merge.
Yeah, sounds good. Eric, we talked about setting up the registry with auth, so then we can add a test case, at least for the Docker auth and then the Kubernetes secret, like some registry with authentication. Do you have any examples on how we can set up a in-cluster registry?
Or
Or Akash, do you know?
You should be.
So what kind of registry? Like an ORIS registry?
Yeah, I think is that what we want, Eric? Like we don't want to be, we want to be vendor neutral, right?
So when
So
I
I have
run
one
my,
running in EKS right now.
So, but you have your ORIS registry running as a pod in your cluster.
Yeah, fronted
Okay.
by an application load balancer, and with TLS terminated at the load balancer.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
I think we can do the same thing. We can just get the ORS distribution version, same one Jimmy's using, and then we can just add it to as a pod in the cluster.
There's a problem though.
Oh, is it? No.
Yeah. The problem is that the artifact specs, the latest artifact spec,
Oh yes, yeah,
is not in line with the latest ORIS registry release.
yeah, the V2 path change. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we can use the old version then. Were you able to get unblocked? I think you were, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I was able to get unblocked because I went back to using the old version of the ORIS registry. So I mean, if you use a specific version, I think it's like the alpha version or whatever, it's in line with the current ORIS libraries. I don't know when they're going to update the libraries to use the new artifact spec.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can I guess use the alpha spec for now. And I think it probably is going to be maybe a month before ORS comes up to RC version. So
Okay. Yeah, Akash, I'll follow up with you offline on this. Like my goal is to not manually validate these
yeah,
updates.
because like every week it feels like they push a patch or something. So
Yeah, it'll be nice to have a automated test that we can just merge when they come up. Yeah, that's everything on our agenda. Jimmy, do you have anything to? I know you had a sync with Shuwei. Were you able to unblock yourself? And did you run into any new problems?
Yeah. So not with notation. That unblocked the issue I was having with notation. I've got other issues. It seems like I always come with issues.
We all do.
What's that?
We all do.
Yeah. Well, so right now I'm trying to test the auth provider that I'm writing for ECR. And I'm running into an issue where it's not showing up available. And so I took your advice, Akash, and I put that side effect import into oris.go, but it didn't work. So then the error message I'm getting is the one that's in the discussion question that I opened up. And so I went and found out where that error message is, and it's coming from the auth provider factory. So I figured maybe I'll put that side effect import in the auth provider factory instead, and maybe that will cause the AWS auth provider to init. I don't know, but I'm building right now. It takes about 11 minutes for me to build this on my machine. So
okay, yeah, interesting, because the Azure one, I've just put it where I had linked it to.
Yeah. I don't know. It didn't work for me. So I'm still, it might be some other problem, but right now I'm still troubleshooting.
Okay. And I checked the names do match. So that shouldn't be the issue. Okay. I'll take another look at it. Let me see if I can think of anything else that might be missing that we did for Azure. So
yeah. And then I'm getting ready to submit this PR, but if I can get this thing to test out properly, but one of the things when I was building, I had to modify the Docker file for the HTTP server. I mean, that's the one that I'm using to build for the Ratify app, because I can't use Go proxies where I'm at. So I have to go direct. So I put in another argument to allow Go proxy direct into the Docker file for that type of scenario. to set the environment up.
Sure.
But it shouldn't be an issue. And I put in the chat, that's the link for the or the image that I'm using for my ORS registry right now.
Ah, thank you.
So I guess that's all I have. I'll let you guys know. I'll put in the discussion if I find anything different.
Cool. Yeah, feel free to ping us if you are running into anything else.
Okay, thanks.
I think I saw Teja on the call.
Did
She had to
have
drop.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
she had to drop. Okay. Yeah. She left some comments on the design doc for the file watchers. So I just wanted to let her know that I've responded to her comments. Okay. Yeah, I'll follow up with her later. And I think everyone here have seen this community meeting poll link. Yeah, I pinged Lee and Alexandra have put in his preference, like he just set as available for all the slots. So that's great. I'm glad to know all the slot there works for him. So I'll ask Teja as well which one suits her better. And Sajay's on vacation right now, so when he comes back, I'll ping him about what his preference is. Yeah, I think that's everything on our agenda. Lee, did you have anything else to discuss?
Not a huge amount. We've been sort of splitting our focus between Ratify and other parts of our scenario, so we haven't been as focused on this. I know there were some points that we were gonna get back to you with some more information on in terms of the splitting the repo and the maintenance that adds in. I know Kara did some looking around and had some notes. I should check with her to get those notes posted on the issue so they can be shared. On the service to service communication, I'm having trouble finding like super useful data to dig into to really make direct comparisons, but most of what I'm finding is that especially if you're using gRPC, which was designed to be very, very low latency and very fast, it's probably not going to be contributing to your timing concerns. Like the main timing concern will be that communication outside of the cluster to your registry or other storage options.
Yep.
But yeah.
I'm digging through the notes because I think Eric mentioned something else that's not gRPC. Like, Eric, do you remember, like, with the on this topic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had mentioned Go plugin, which is it's behind it. There's two. It's a framework that's by HashiCorp, but behind it, the actual communication can be handled by gRPC or the Go plugin module. But the Go plugin module, like I think it's NetPlug. Maybe it's not NetPlugin, but the built-in support for Go plugins doesn't work on Windows. So we would be using, if we wanted to keep support of all of our operating systems, we would have to be using the gRPC mechanism. So yeah, it's just a framework on top of that. So
got it. Okay, good to know. And Lee, with the priority wise, is your top of priority still enabling the CRDs for verifier and store?
I think the top of our priority is, I wouldn't say CRDs are necessarily the top so much as like generally enabling Ratify to do what it says it does, ideally in a Kubernetes environment. Like CRDs are definitely a useful way for it to be easier to interact with in a Kubernetes environment, but that's not so much the top of our list as just we want to be able to get Ratify working and doing so effectively in this scenario. I do think of most of what we're looking at. Ratify is still sort of top of our list in terms of current gaps in the scenario. Most of the other things we have been working with so far have been not mature, but a little farther along than what we've gotten from Ratify. So it's definitely still at the top of our priority list in terms of it being like the gap that we've run into.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what is there any? Are you blocked in? Are there any features that you need and you're blocked on with the to build your demo?
At this point, we've sort of put Ratify to one side and are focusing on other parts of the scenario. So it's hard for me to say specific features. I think our general use cases is you can verify that an image has a signature. You can verify that an image has a valid SBOM, ideally a signed valid SBOM, and you can verify that an image has a vulnerability scan that reports no critical vulnerabilities or something like this that allows us to query vulnerability scan responses. And of those, it sounds like the image signature is maybe about there, but the SBOM, specifically assigned SBOM, sounds still pretty shaky, and there's no verifiers around vulnerability scans at this point. So in terms of like specific verifiers, those are our areas of focus. In terms of general function, I would mostly point back to the issues we've opened around like what can be done to smooth operation in Kubernetes, and to make both like setting up config and setting up policy authoring approachable and understandable for customers.
So for me, or I guess I had some questions. So you mentioned there were some things that you're evaluating that are not as mature but further along, or something like that. Maybe not as far along but more mature. So, some combination of those. So it'd be
just that they're also not like fully mature, but they're a little bit further along at this point.
Right. So if there are ideas that you like from those, or things that would make sense to improve the functionality we have, it'd be interesting to know what those are and how those differ, and whether those differences are a difference in just feature gap, or if they're a difference in design principle. Like, if it's something that that another project has that would be worthwhile for us to support, then that's something that we could look at. If they do it this way and we do it this way, and we just consciously decided to do it the way we do it for whatever reason, then that might be something that we'd have to look at.
Yeah,
but that would definitely.
I do want to back up and clarify just to make this clear. We haven't really got other options for the niche that Ratify can fill in the scenario. It's not so much that we're directly comparing Ratify with some other admission control offering that we find fits the setting better. It's the other pieces of this scenario that we've played with are like SBOM generation, signing, container registry, and sort of looking at how ORAS is handling things versus how like cosign is handling its signature. So it's less that we have direct comparisons and we can say, hey, this thing's doing it better, because frankly, not a lot of things are doing this.
Right. Gotcha.
So yeah, it's focused on other parts of the scenario rather than focus on replacements for Ratify, because we really haven't found much else out there.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I was going to say another thing we're aware of, even internally at Microsoft, we're aware that vulnerability scanning is of interest and validating it. if you are like, if you have a sample where you're already using some vulnerability scanning and you have reports that you're using that are attached via Aura's artifacts, then, you know, that would definitely be great to see, at least for me. I haven't seen something that I could be like, oh yeah, I could write a verifier against that. So if you already have that, or you have a project that you can reference that spits something out that we could make a verifier to present a use case for that, I mean, I'm all for it. I don't have one in front of me. And then I think with the pass-through for signed SBOM, for example, for SP, like for the SPDX verifier, like we do have support for nesting right now. And I think we could, like I can extend the SPDX that I have right now and sign it. And I think with pass-through mode, it wouldn't take too long to have a policy that validates the signature on that SBOM. So definitely, I think closing the gap there is just a matter of like all the support would be there if we merge this PR. We would just have to extend that policy and then actually sign an SBOM. Like my test bed doesn't have a signed SBOM, but it's not that it can't, it just doesn't. So
yeah, we don't have vulnerability scan results built into our sample at this point. We're building, finishing up with getting everything that we do have built in signed at the moment. So we will shortly have a sample that has signed SBOMs if that's of any use for you to look at. And I've played around with that a little bit, just like on my own in terms of what we can get signed and whatnot. So
sure.
Yeah. We can I think vulnerability scans are sort of our like the closest to what might be termed a stretch goal, because it's definitely not been on our first focus. But I can at the very least point you towards what our top picks for vulnerability scanning tools are, because there's a few that are pretty standardized at this point that, you know, I think like Trivy is one of the ones on the short list, and you can make a verifier that's specific to like a Trivy vulnerability scan, or even Anchor's SBOM tool SIFT has, I think, Gripe.
Yeah, Gripe.
Yeah, so they have a tool that pairs well with their SBOM tool, so that might be
SIFT will do the SBOM, and then Gripe will scan it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll give Gripe a go, because I think the license checker, it was built, I'm pretty sure I built that using SIFT. So if those are complementary, then I can explore that.
I mean, SBOM formats are a lot more standardized in general. So I think if there's a vulnerability scan report that's designed to take in an SPDX SBOM, it should work regardless of what output it is. But I believe Anchor's got their tools set up so that they play really nice together.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thanks for sharing, Lee. Anyone before we wrap up today? Okay, cool. Thanks for joining, everybody. And we'll meet up again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.